Hey everybody, welcome back to the Noel Casler podcast, episode 131. Brought out the 68 Martin nylon string. Proper folk guitar. It's too hot to play anything else. All right, here we go. Let's get into it, right? Stop wasting time. Let's talk about all the horrible news. I'm sorry. You know what? It's the sweet spot of summer, despite the heat wave, and we're in a massive one here on the East Coast, as we were last time I did this. I feel like I only do podcasts in a heat wave now, and I hope you're surviving. I hope you're staying cool. It's really no laughing matter. Climate change is upon us. Turkey had set a world record for Turkey the other day, like 50 degrees Celsius or some horrifically high number. And, yesterday the Trump administration revoked the endangerment finding, which is a sort of a classification that the EPA used to propose and enact climate legislation, first during Obama and then during President Biden. And the idea behind it is that these greenhouse gases that vehicles emit are bad for human health. Therefore, the government has a right to do something about it and force industry to make changes. And it saves lives, and it saves our planet, and it saves consumers money. So, of course, it fell out of favor with the drill baby drill guy and his supplicants in the administration, like Lee Zeldin, who is our current EPA administrator, and just a scumbag. He's a Long Island guy. He's from that kind of culture that's pro-Trump, bullshit, law and order kind of guys, dumbasses. I just spent a week in Sag Harbor, which is a nice place, but you're surrounded by that sort of towny Long Island, big pickup truck contractor type that I've known my whole life. And we got him up here where I am too. It's part of New York. You know, it's the culture that Trump tapped into, as I've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast for 131 episodes or 4 years or however long this nightmare has been going on. It's been going on for 10 years, if we're being honest, but now we're at the apex of the insanity, right? We're at the point where the planet is dying, and they're bragging about, revoking legislation that we're just playing catch up with the rest of the world anyway, right? Like Europe and a lot of other places got hip to this long before we did. Australia, plenty of places. And we've just been not only dragging our asses, we've been spitting in the face of science. We've been building bigger pickup trucks and bigger factories and coal, That was Trump's thing in the first administration, coal, baby. Like it's stupidity at its finest, and it's benefiting nobody except for the people who are going to profit from the destruction of our planet and the degradation of, our communities and our lifestyles. How much more evidence do you need that the planet is in peril? There was a tsunami last night in Russia. It was headed towards Alaska and the West Coast. They averted disaster this time. But next time they may not be so lucky. And that's tectonic plates shifting. That's an Earth heating up. That's things happening to the atmosphere that we can't even foresee, right? The polar ice cap is melting. There's all kinds of things that could be catastrophic in the near future. And the heat is kind of the deadliest one. It's like flooding. You don't really think about it. You think, how can you die from that? And it's what ends up killing the most people. Places like Phoenix, you could get the wet bulb effect. If there's no humidity and it's super hot, you're in trouble. Your body can't cool down. So, good way to start the podcast on a happy note, but that's where we are, and everybody's talking about Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, and I've written about it on Substack. If you're listening to this and you're not subscribing to Noel's Notes, you're not getting the best of me. Not that you need the best of me, but you're not getting the focused sort of response I have to all this insanity. A subject like that, I'm pretty sick of talking about it. I've spoken about it recently on here. I've brought it up on pretty much every podcast I was a guest on for years. I mean, I did podcasts for 5 years. I stopped doing other people's podcasts after the election because my whole point was to win the election. I wasn't trying to entertain you in this. I'm not going to tell stories about Jeffrey Epstein and then have somebody plug a commercial for dog food or something. This is not entertainment. You know, he attacked friends of mine. I know a girl who was groomed by Trump when she was 12 years old and taken ice skating lessons at his rink, and she ended up in Epstein's house. And she said to me, Noel, you wouldn't believe what those men did to girls in that place. And sadly, I would believe it. You know, and she's one of hundreds. And it happened in New York City. It happened on East 71st Street, number 9 East 71st Street, next door to number 11, which is Howard Lutnick's townhouse, where he's been hosting fundraisers for Donald Trump since 2019, since May of 2019, more specifically, when they knew it was coming down, when they knew Jeffrey Epstein was going to get popped again. Because originally, the deal he had in Florida, that, you know, the state attorney general, or the state attorney general at the time was Pam Bondi. The U.S. district attorney was Alex Acosta, and that's the guy who, you know, orchestrated the sweetheart deal that allowed him to get busted, basically tried on state charges, which would have been something that Pam Bondi approved, and that kept this case kind of local. And he did some time there in Palm Beach County, and that's where they let him leave for the day and go back to his mansion in Palm Beach, where he continued to molest young girls, essentially. You know, he would get girls from West Palm Beach, because Trump and Jeffrey, you know, they pick on people from vulnerable incomes, right? He's not going up standing outside of Horace Mann trying to get teenagers who need a buck. He's going to West Palm Beach. You know, those are two separate cities. That's Riverdale, and sadly, that's the school that one of the victims this week attended. I'll get to that later, but my point is, these guys know who they're preying on. They prey on women that they're deeming to be from sort of vulnerable situations, because they think they'll be more likely to, you know, accept their initial offers of cash for exploitation, you know, and they're not coming out and saying, hey, I'm going to abuse you when you come to my house. They say, hey, you want to make a couple bucks, give me a massage or something? And that's Virginia Giuffre, who killed herself earlier this year. She was the victim that was handed around like a piece of meat by Prince Andrew and Trump and Epstein and all these guys. And she's the one that he, the other day, you know, he tripped up on this statement, like, he poached an employee from me, you know. That's who he was talking about. He was talking about a teenage girl he had working at Mar-a-Lago, which already should have raised so many red flags. Like, wait, what? What are you doing? Like, there aren't grown adult masseuses all over South Florida. What are you doing with a teenage girl who looks like Ivanka in there working for you? And we know what he's doing. Same thing he was doing on the beauty pageants. Same thing he was doing on Miss Teen USA. Same thing he's been doing his whole goddamn life for decades and getting away with it because he's a rich white man. If he had been a poor white guy, even from the Bronx, he wouldn't have lived to be 21 because somebody's brother or dad would have taken him out. But he was rich, and he could afford to hire lawyers, and he could afford, more importantly, to hire off-duty NYPD cops as his security, and tough guys and mobsters, and then he'd get greasy lawyers to go hand off NDAs and tell them to keep quiet. And some of those lawyers are podcasters now. Some of them are bullshitting people still that they don't know all they know. You know, and I want no part of that. So I don't do guest spots. I don't want to talk about this in any kind of scintillating, breaking news bullshit way that people are doing who don't really understand what the hell they're talking about, because they don't understand the reality of the victims, right? They don't have to look in someone's eyes or see how, you know, broken their lives have been for decades because of this abuse. And one of the worst things is, and I hear this a lot from women, is like, why doesn't she come forward? Why don't they come forward now? Screw you. Look at the people who have come forward. Look at what their lives have gone through, and look how little accountability Trump has been held up to. Not everybody has the resources, you know, of some of the more famous people who've come forward and the hell that they've endured. Not everybody can deal with that. It doesn't mean they're weak or strong. It means they don't have the circumstances in life, because people get abused like that and they go into addiction, they go into depression, they go into other kind of behavior, acting out and trying to process the trauma that they've been put through. And as I said, a lot of these women aren't coming from great situations to begin with. They're coming from broken homes and abuse and all kinds of stuff. And if you've lived through any of that, you know how much work it takes to just get normal again. So this is not a game, is my point. This is serious stuff. This guy's a criminal. He's a predator, and he's gotten away with his predation forever. And, he'll still get away with it. I'm glad that it's finally catching, that he can't get away from the news cycle. But that's a bit of a summer fad. The legal ramifications will probably be, taken care of in whatever kind of deal Todd Blanche has arranged with Ghislaine Maxwell, right? She's obviously been offered something to keep her mouth shut about Trump and, implicate some Democrats or something. And, some of that is true. It wasn't just Trump in there. There was a brothel on East 71st Street. Lots of wealthy, famous men came in there. The Koch brothers lived right down the street at 740 Park Avenue. That was David Koch's residence. He's passed away, but, it's very convenient location. And that's why Howard Lutnick had that fundraiser, because he called all the predators down. When they knew it was coming down, he said, come on down. And Steve Wynn flew out from Vegas, as I mentioned recently, and he was not in good health. He didn't travel much, and he traveled for this gig. Trump was there, Rudy Giuliani was there. It's in Howard Lutnick's house. And he had a fundraiser last year for the campaign, both out in the Hamptons and then in that same townhouse, I believe. I know about the one in the Hamptons, and I believe he had one in the same location. So it's not just Trump that was there, and he wasn't just abusing women on Epstein Island, right? A lot of this gets caught up in, like, was he on the island? I never went to the island. It doesn't matter. Are you telling me people don't have illicit sex in New York City? You don't need to go to an island in the Caribbean to do something wrong. And Trump knows that. He's abused women at the U.S. Open, where I worked for 12 years. I did the opening and closing ceremonies, and our box was right next to his box where we'd put the celebrities. I dealt with, like, if Aretha Franklin sang the opening, the anthem at the opening, I would deal with her all night, and we'd bring her up to this celebrity box. And Trump's was right, like, you could see it when you go out on the patio, and he would always bring the Miss Universe contestants and stuff. And he assaulted somebody in that place, and she's talked about it. You can read about it publicly, and if you know the layout, it's the perfect kind of thing to do that. Not that there's not that any circumstances like warrant that behavior. I'm not saying it that way, but like Trump knows where he can get away with stuff sort of in broad daylight, like he did to E. Jean Carroll, in the Bergdorf Goodman dressing room. And in these U.S. Open like booths, they're private like boxes, and you have sort of a patio area where there's seats and people sit, and then there's like a kitchen area where you put out lobster rolls and food and drinks. And then there's a bathroom towards the back, and that's towards the entrance. And that's kind of dark, and there aren't usually a lot of people there because there's always tennis going on and people are watching it. So that's where he cornered and attacked this young woman, which is his move. He's done it at Mar-a-Lago in the bedroom to a People magazine reporter who I spoke with in the 2016 campaign. It's kind of his MO. He does these things almost in broad daylight. If you've noticed, he always projects what he's going to do. It's a weird tick of his. So, it's disgusting. And I'm glad it's getting the light of day. I'm kind of tired of seeing things that I've been talking about forever, just like being regurgitated for clicks. That part is nasty. I wrote about, there's this article in the UK Guardian, written by several reporters, but the main one is a woman named Lucy Osborne, and I spoke with her in 2020 about all this stuff, and she'd already written this great piece about this contest in the 90s that Trump had with John Casablancas, and they would bring over these teenage girls from Europe and stuff, and they would make them dance for Trump and his business partners, and that was kind of the model that he set up with Trump model management. That's kind of what Miss Teen USA was. That was sort of a cattle call for types. And Trump would inspect the pageants and be, the contestants rather, and be extremely inappropriate. And the first season that he did that, it stopped production, because cameramen and all these people are sitting around and he's on stage making notes, who's got the bigger breasts, who he likes, jotting it down, who looks like Melania, Melania, that's a slip. Melania came later, same sort of business, but Ivanka, who hosted these things in 2000, it was maybe 6 or something like that, and she was 16 years old. She had no business hosting anything. She was terrible, but she was there, and she knew what her father was doing. She always has, and she sort of plays up his attraction for her because she knows he's not going to take it out on her. He's going to take it out on somebody who looks like her. He does weird shit with her. He makes her give him lap dances and all that stuff. But, she is safe in the fact that, like, he's got surrogates for his desire for her. And that's how sick this stuff is. This stuff was like a sport to Trump, and then it turned into a business, and it turned into a trafficking business to collect compromat. And that's where Jeffrey Epstein comes in. And again, I talk about this in Noel's notes, or I write about it. You should read that, because it's a lot easier for me to put stuff out kind of written, where I can edit it and really get my facts straight than just to press play and talk for an hour like I'm doing now. And last week I mistakenly said Melissa Hortman, the state representative, former speaker who was murdered in Minnesota. I mistakenly said she was from Wisconsin. I know better because I'd already written an article about it, and the piece went away too quickly in the news cycle, and it's still breaking my heart. But I'll make a mistake, and then I have to read all the comments like, I know I made a mistake. I make a lot of mistakes. I've had COVID 3 times. My brain doesn't work the same way. I'm sorry. That's why I don't do these things that often. So read the stuff if you want to hear what I have to say, because that's a much more kind of adult way to put it out. I'm kind of over the talking video stuff. I don't think it's good for anybody to be looking at these screens all day long. And I just do a little bit when I feel like I have something to say, but I'm not trying to be an influencer to get you to watch me all the time and stuff. Get your news from a newspaper. Get your news from a trusted source. Don't be following the internet all the time. I know that might not be a popular thing to say, but it's true. There was an op-ed in the New York Times the other day. Half of Americans didn't read a book last year because they're losing their ability to focus for long-form concentration, and that is disproportionately affecting lower-income people and children specifically, right? Just like fast food and all that stuff always hits sort of lower-income communities, obesity and all this stuff, because it's just fast food and it's cheap and available. It's getting to be the same way with information. People are scrolling and watching TikTok videos and getting all this information in snippets. And what that does is it sort of like malnourishes your mind, and it makes people more susceptible to people who are good at manipulating the internet. And I've seen a lot of grifters in the sort of sphere of influence that I've been in. I know a lot of the folks that are just in it for the money, or they're taking credit for somebody else's stuff and being like, breaking news. They're breathlessly doing this stuff to feed an algorithm to put money in their pockets. They're not doing it for the greater good. And we've seen an avalanche of that in recent years. And we lost the last election in big part because of that, because the people that are good or better at manipulating that stuff, in essence, whoever lies the loudest is who wins these days. And it makes entire generations of people more susceptible to demagogues like Donald Trump. That's why all this stuff happened. That's why he was able to, smear Hillary Clinton with all this Russian propaganda that she was running a sex trafficking ring and all this crazy shit. That people are finally now saying, no, that was you who did that. And thankfully, there's some blowback on the right. But it's temporary because there's guns, there's abortion, there's patriotism, there's all this other toxic iconography that's so embedded in that side of things that this ultimately won't really stick. It may, in the best case scenario, it may like take out Trump and he'd have to step aside, and then you'd have a J.D. Vance or somebody else we haven't thought about yet, coming to the forefront, but the operation, the oligarchs behind this thing have their claws in society and in people's minds, and a lot of that is done through technology. It's through Twitter and all this crap, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. None of these guys are on your side. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, all those dudes that were standing there at the inauguration, all those tech bros, Sundar, whatever his name is, the Google guy. Those guys were there because they want to take over. They want a tech oligarchy, essentially. And they're getting it. They have it now. So the more time you spend on their products with your attention, the more you're strengthening them and weakening yourself. That's not to say don't consume what you want, but don't get sucked into it, and don't get sucked into the hype of it. If you're feeling strong emotions off of something, find a way to process those emotions. Breathe, get back into your body and your own mindfulness, because it'll overwhelm you, and you'll be manipulated by this stuff before you even know it. And I'm not saying that to preach at you or be condescending. I'm telling you what's happened to me, and if it's happened to me, it might happen to somebody else like me, right? Because I've been doing a lot of this crap for a long time, and it doesn't make you feel good, right? It doesn't make you feel good when you engage in a lot of this stuff. When you walk out in nature and you walk around and you're in your body and in your breath, that feels good. And it's hard to detox from this stuff. I've been trying to do it for weeks. I'm on day 22 of sort of leaving my phone in a desk drawer all day when I'm out and about. And it's hard, and I've sort of been backsliding in the last couple of days because, as I said, I was out in Sag Harbor and, I was walking this dog I take care of and going to the beach and doing a bunch of other things and writing. And, now I'm back in my routines, and I fall into the habit of picking up the phone and looking at, scrolling something. I say I'm going to check the news, and next thing I know, I'm looking at some stupid video and a clip of Frank Zappa on Miami Vice 20, 30 years ago, which was actually a cool clip, and he called cocaine weasel dust. You think of Frank Zappa. You think Frank Zappa would have been buying all this bullshit and making TikTok videos and stuff? He would sense, he would sniff out that he's getting manipulated, and we need to do the same thing. We need to find our inner Frank Zappa and cut through the bullshit, get to the truth, right? Because you don't want to be manipulated. You don't want to feed the noise, and you especially don't want to feed the things that make Trump stronger. I'm going to take a sip. Right? Retweeting his pictures and every stupid thing he says, it really only strengthens him. I know a lot of people think no, when enough people see how crazy he is, they'll turn against him. Well, enough people saw it in 2020. If you couldn't see it during the pandemic, when he was having those press conferences and telling people to inject bleach, you're not going to see it now. The people who vote for Trump are doing it because it's a lifestyle brand. They're doing it because the communities they live in, their buddies support Trump. The guys they work at job sites with support Trump. And their wives, and their kids might think oh, this guy's kind of bad. Or their wives might be even more vociferously into him than they are, which a buddy I went to high school with, that's how he was. He came to see me. I went to see him at his kid's baseball game, was playing in my town. And he's like, hey, I told my wife I was coming to see you. And she's like, they're Democrats. Don't go see him. I mean, that's insane. But that's where we are in this country. People get so hopped up on this, especially the propaganda they're ingesting on Fox News and, the patriotism and the waving the flag and the racism and the xenophobia. It reminds them of their parents and their grandparents, because there's a lot of that in white American suburban and exurban culture. A lot more than people want to admit, because they're nice to each other and they consider themselves good people, and they have a nice car and a nice home, and they mow their lawn and they take care of their kids, so they like to look down on other people that are below them, right? And that's always minorities. It's always African Americans in this country, right? They think, oh, look how those people live. We don't live like that. We're good, Christian white people. Bullshit. Go look outside. Go look who's working in these heat waves. It's immigrants. Go look who's working in your restaurants. It's immigrants. And disproportionately, it's people from Latin America, from Central and South America. And they're working their asses off. I was in the Hamptons all week, or 10 days or something. I was in Nantucket before that. The only people I saw working were Latinos, and they were working their asses off with smiles on their face. And I'm not saying it's fun, but they were joking around with each other. They were working their butts off, and at the end of the day, they got up and joked around with each other, got in their trucks, and went home. And they took that money home. They probably sent a lot of it back home. They spent it on their families here. If you ever go look at them on a day off, they're having a picnic with 5 generations, cooking out, celebrating some kid's birthday, going to the beach, you know? They're doing what you're supposed to do. They're the epitome of what people think is the American dream, and they're being demonized by a guy who's lived on Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue his whole life, who was popping up to Jeffrey Epstein's house 20 blocks north to bang 13-year-olds, to rape them, that reminded him of his daughter, right? And then he was hopping on his private 757 since the 90s and flying down to Palm Beach to do the same thing with Jeffrey Epstein, or get all coked up and party with a bunch of Buffalo Bills cheerleaders, which is that clip that famously goes around, where he said something so disgusting to Jeffrey Epstein that Jeffrey Epstein doubled over in embarrassment. You know, think of that. Think about being the guy that said something so gross that you made Jeffrey Epstein double over, right? That's who Trump is. He's a whack job. And I've told you this a million times. I don't even want to keep telling you it. It's stupid, you know? What I want to tell you to do is pay attention and educate your fellow Americans. If you know somebody who's buying this bullshit, you got to figure out a way to reach them before it's too late. We all do. Because it's sliding away from us, this democracy. This isn't something you're just going to vote your way out of without educating enough people that people take to the streets and finally do something about it. Okay? Enough of a rant. I think I'll just make it a rant for now, because I got to go. I'm going to go. I realized it's already 7 o'clock. I got a meeting I got to go to. I got to stay sober first and foremost. Okay? So I'll put this out. And, I'll wish you well, and I'll come back soon and talk to you. But, that's it. You got to take care of each other. You got to get involved. You got to deal with this environmental stuff. You got to read these articles about what's happening. You got to think about what Lee Zeldin just did and how Trump's bragging about it. He had a tweet today about the environmental scam. What does that mean, The environment scam. They're trying to keep people stupid and in the dark. It's our job to bring the light, okay? So let's do it, all right? Until next time, take care of each other. Check out Noel's notes if you want. And I appreciate all your support. That's what keeps me going, your nice comments and your support. So thank you. Stay cool. Don't lose your head. There's a lot of suffering in the world right now. We got to bring light to that. And we start with ourselves in our own hearts. You got to, when you feel that anger rising up in you, you got to learn to breathe. You can't feed it. You got to overcome it, because in place of it will come compassion and awareness and mindfulness. And those are the way out. I promise you, that's the path out. It's within, I'm not trying to be all hippy-dippy on you, but I'm telling you, you're going to want this stuff. You're going to need it. Most of you guys know what I'm talking about. You know more than I do about this stuff. But it's out there. There's ways to sort of tap into a wisdom beyond us. And don't let your brain get sucked in by some algorithm that's going to thrive off of your anger and your resentment, because that isn't going to help anybody. Take what you want, leave the rest. Most importantly, take care of each other, all right? So that's it for now. Noel Casler Podcast. Peace.